All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. So, Ole Miss is going to somewhat welcome LSU to town to play college football next fall. And I guarantee you, on that day that Vaught Hemingway will have standing room only for that one. In the span of just a few hours today, okay, Lane Kiffin has gone from being one of the most beloved people in the state of Mississippi to now being one of the most vilified as he's leaving Ole Miss to become the next head ball coach at LSU. In recent weeks, we saw Kiffin being courted by both Florida and LSU before he ultimately decided to take his talents to Baton Rouge. Now, the biggest mystery to me is why did Kiffin just walk away from a playoff team? I know that Kiffin wanted to stay and coach Ole Miss throughout the playoff, but the school officials there said no. But why walk away from that in the first place? Kiffin is walking away from an 11-1 team that just wrapped up its best season in more than 60 years. And he's walking into uncertainty. And the reason why I said this is because, like I've said in the past, LSU has run head coaches out of town who won national championships. And yes, Kiffin's bank account just got bigger, but also so did the expectations that come along with it. Kiffin just showed that winning at Ole Miss is indeed doable because he had three consecutive seasons where the Rebels won at least 10 games. But he's still leaving with an incomplete on his report card. And I am not here to make Kiffin the victim in this because he's far from that. This is Lane Kiffin's mess that he created because Kiffin is going someplace now to try to win a championship when he could have possibly won one at Ole Miss in about 6 weeks. And I get it that coaches do have the right to move on after a successful season because we've seen it countless times, okay? But Kiffin's decision to leave Ole Miss for LSU and leave Ole Miss like this represents everything that is wrong with college football. Coaches want to sit back and preach loyalty to their players, but all along, Kiffin was talking to multiple schools in the same conference as Ole Miss. And by doing so, Kiffin basically told Ole Miss, you know what? You all are not that good enough for me. I talked about this several weeks ago, and I'll say it again. I said it again. I'll say it again right now that I would have been surprised if Kiffin was going to stay at Oxford. I felt like between LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida, it was going to be LSU. Okay. And Kiffin's inability to commit to Ole Miss yesterday and even right after the Egg Bowl on Friday validated that. I think once Ole Miss beat Mississippi State on Friday afternoon, that would have been the perfect time for Lane Kiffin to say, you know what, enough of this. I've thought about it. Yeah, the LSU intrigue was interesting. Yes, the Florida intrigue was interesting, but I want to start what I finished. And I'm not saying, you know what, let me just hang around to try to coach this team in the playoff to try to start what I finish. No, 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 no. You literally continue to pitch your tent there and legitimately start what you finish. So it's one of those where I do not blame the school officials at Ole Miss for putting their foot down and allowing Kiffin to not coach the Rebels during the playoff. I know that there are some folks out there who said, you know what, Ole Miss should have allowed Lane Kiffin to coach this team during the playoff. Absolutely not. If I'm Ole Miss, I want a head coach coaching this team who is committed to Ole Miss, not just committed to Ole Miss just for today. Okay, because think about it. This decision could have been made yesterday, but Lane Kiffin was sitting around waiting to see if Auburn knocked off Alabama in the Iron Bowl and possibly the Rebels would have gotten to the SEC championship game for the first time in school history. But of course, when Alabama won that game, that was out of the window. And then the decision came down today. Basically, for the last couple of days, we've seen Lane Kiffin hold both LSU and Ole Miss hostage on this. And of course, you knew that somebody was going to win out in the Lane Kiffin sweepstakes. And of course, it was the folks on the Bayou. And it's one of those, again, getting back to that game. Ole Miss rather was an Auburn defensive stop away from getting to the SEC championship game for the first time in history. And now, of course, all of that, as well as their first trip to the college football playoff, is going to be overshadowed. Kiffin was on the verge of having statues built for him all over Oxford, but he just became maybe outside of Starkville, because I guarantee you the Mississippi State folks are not sad to see Lane Kiffin go, but nonetheless, for the bulk of the state, he just became the most hated man in the history of that state. This is not a Nick Saban going to Alabama situation, because remember, Nick Saban left LSU, yes, but he left LSU to try out the NFL with the Miami Dolphins. And then when it didn't work out, Alabama came a calling, and the rest is history. This is Lane Kiffin literally leaving Ole Miss, an SEC school, for another SEC school. Okay. And if you're Lane Kiffin, you're making your rounds in the SEC. Remember, 1 year at Tennessee before the USC job became available once Pete Carroll left to the NFL. He vacated for Los Angeles then, and now from Ole Miss to LSU. And it's one of those where I get it, because each year we see head coaches, for example, leave group of five schools to get bigger jobs in the power conferences. But nobody's really walked away from a playoff team. We've seen coaches get teams to a New Year's Six bowl, and more often than not, with the exception of probably Brian Kelly leaving Cincinnati to go to Notre Dame, more often than not, the schools want and the kids rather want the coaches to stay around and coach the bowl game one last time, because it's love. And for the most part, when you're a group of five school, you have to understand, when your head coach has success, it's expected for him to move up. And even this year, we know that Eric Morris is taking the Oklahoma State job. North Texas does have an opportunity possibly to get to the college football playoff. Okay, the same could be said with Bob Chesney at James Madison, because a lot of people are rumoring him possibly to take over UCLA. But nonetheless, neither Morris or Chesney are leaving their respective jobs for another job in the same conference that they're currently in. And on top of that, all of this, as far as when I'm talking about James Madison as well as North Texas, it's not a guarantee that they're going to make the playoff, because it's only going to be one of them from the group of five, possibly. Okay, but Lane Kiffin just became this generation's version of Tommy Tuberville, because once upon a time we saw Tuberville be the head ball coach at Ole Miss, give his commitment to Ole Miss, and just a few days later, he was at Auburn. Now, don't get me wrong, Tuberville did not have the success at Ole Miss that Lane Kiffin did, but the folks in Oxford still had to sit back and watch him have a ton of success at Auburn, win the SEC a couple of times. And then, of course, in those days, Auburn and Ole Miss played each other each and every year in the old SEC West. I'll tell you like this: I never want to hear anyone ever again complain about the transfer portal in regards to the players. Why? Because, yes, does the transfer portal need to be fixed? Absolutely. But I feel like the coaches portal is a bigger problem in not just college football, collegiate athletics. You look at football and you look at the NFL as an example. You cannot just sit up there and pluck another head coach from a team during the regular season. And of course, if you do, it's got to be money exchange, draft picks, you name it. Usually, especially with the playoff teams, they wait to either they have a bye week or something like that to talk to the offensive or defensive coordinators who they're interested in moving up and giving them a head coaching spot. Not here, not smack dab in the middle of the season, where you have a team that is on the cusp of getting to the college football playoff, and now they don't have their head coach. So the Lane Kiffin saga is not going away anytime soon. We all know that. But nonetheless, Ole Miss has to try to find a way to put this behind them and focus on the playoff, which is going to be easier said than done. I give those kids a ton of credit. I knew that Mississippi State was going to play them hard in the Egg Bowl, which they did. It's a rivalry game. But Ole Miss's ability and talent, won out, and they were able to wear down the Bulldogs as that game went on. And to their credit, they were able to, channel out all the noise and focus on the task at hand. Those kids are going to have to do that once again. And also, it's one of those where we heard there were stories where Lane Kiffin was attempting to remain at Ole Miss and coach this team during the playoff. And like I said, kudos to the school administrators for putting their foot down and saying no. Lane Kiffin was attempting to make himself a martyr on this, but it's his team who he's leaving behind. They are the martyrs because not only did they just lose their head coach, but of course they lost some of the coaches on the staff as well. Not everybody, okay? Bob Golding, the defensive coordinator, is now being bumped up to being the new head coach, and it's one of those where if you're Ole Miss, I totally don't blame you. You want somebody there who wants to be there. You want somebody leading your program who's committed to leading their program. We could take it back a couple of years. Go back to 1989. Can't remember the guy's name right now. Michigan basketball had a head coach who decided to take the Arizona State job just prior to the NCAA tournament. Bo Schembechler, who the former head coach, former head football coach of Michigan, was then the athletic director. And he said, you know what? I want a Michigan man leading my team. He bumped up Steve Fisher. Michigan won a national championship, and the rest is history. So going forward right now, Ole Miss is going to have to rally around Pete Golding. Okay. Kiffin really left the school in a bind because this is one of those where this is unprecedented. Okay, we've seen coaches leave schools before, but nothing like this. And I think this is totally unprecedented because you kept Ole Miss dancing around on this, and now, okay, they really didn't have a choice but to promote Pete Golding because it's one of those. Who else are they going to go out there and get at this state of the game in the coaching cycle? It's not like Ole Miss's season is over. You left after the bowl game, and they can go out there and try to find a candidate. A lot of the big name candidates, they've already been scooped up for a job. And then if you're Ole Miss, you have to get a head coach on the fly. Of course, you got to get somebody who's familiar with this program because definitely not this week because you're not going to be playing in the SEC championship game. But soon enough, very soon, you've got to get yourself ready for a college football playoff game. And at least with Pete Golding, you have somebody and you have holdovers on that staff who have familiarity. The kids are comfortable with them and they can go out there and play. It's one of those where one big question for me is, will Kiffin's departure hurt Ole Miss when it comes to seeding for the playoffs? I totally think it could possibly happen. Clearly, we know that the Rebels are not going to get a first round bye. Had they gotten to the SEC championship game, I think they definitely would have still been in the mix for that. Definitely, whoever wins the SEC championship, whether it's Georgia or Alabama, they're getting a first round bye. Definitely the winner of the Big Ten. You might see the loser of that Big Ten championship game get a first round bye. And we could say the same about the loser of the SEC championship game. Nonetheless, Ole Miss is definitely going to host a first round playoff game. Who that's going to be against, we don't know. But it'll be very interesting to see if the committee holds that against this team due to the fact that, hey, your head coach that helped to get you here is no longer there. We've got to wait and see. What awaits Lane Kiffin at LSU? Well, he's getting the hero's welcome, or he's gotten the hero's welcome so far. We've seen the plane touchdown in Baton Rouge, this, that, and the third. But also, like I said, Lane Kiffin has a deal with the expectations there. You look at Brian Kelly. Before this year, Brian Kelly wasn't bad at LSU. He wasn't great either. But and I say when I say he wasn't great, he wasn't LSU great. Okay, and it's one of those where he never got them to the playoff. He got them to the SEC championship game once, but then again, there's expectations, and then there's LSU expectations, and they don't care how much money that they paid you. They want you to go out there and produce. Say what you want, LSU has not been right ever since Nick Saban left and came back and took the Alabama job. And then, of course, the success that Nick Saban went on to have at Alabama, and the folks in Baton Rouge were not thrilled about that. They haven't been right ever since, okay? And the expectations around that program are through the roof. So the bottom line is, I hope Lane Kiffin realizes that, you know what? He just walked into the pressure cooker. He's going to have success there because Lane Kiffin, with the exception of his time with the Raiders, has for the most part, has success almost every stop along the way on his college football journey. Excuse me. He's going to recruit Louisiana. I'll tell you like this. I'll be very interested to see going forward with Lane Kiffin recruiting that region. Is he going to be able to get kids from the state of Mississippi to come to LSU and play football for him? We got to wait and see. That's going to be a big one right there because, again, he is a very vilified man in that state right now. How will the history books remember Lane Kiffin for this? Um, it's not going to be good. And honestly, the way I feel is this: no matter how much success that Lane Kiffin goes on and enjoys at LSU, he could even win a national championship there. He's always going to be remembered as the guy who just walked away from an 11-1 team on the cusp of getting to the college football playoff. And anybody to a man will tell you that had Lane Kiffin decided to stay at Ole Miss, they had more than a puncher's chance with him as their head coach to win it all. Okay, not a guarantee, but they were definitely going to be in the mix. And I'll tell you like this: they would have been a team with, at least with Lane Kiffin, that nobody would have wanted to face. I think Ole Miss is going to go out there with an us against the world attitude, and I'm still not going to write them off. But nonetheless, it still would have been different had Lane Kiffin decided to stay there. And I'll tell you like this: if Lane Kiffin had decided to stay, it would have really rallied this team. It would have really galvanized that program. But nonetheless, he pissed it all away, folks. That's the bottom line. So if you're Ole Miss, okay, I ask you, is Pete Golding or Lane Kiffin, who is going to be under more pressure, uh, taking over now to win? I still think it's going to be Lane at LSU. I think Pete Golding is going to have pressure because Ole Miss wants to keep up with the Joneses in the SEC. And of course, I totally understand that. I totally get it. The SEC right now is tougher than ever, especially with the additions of Texas and Oklahoma. We have seen the surge by a school like Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt just went 10-2. They're going to be in the mix to possibly get in that large bid for the college football playoff. And then, of course, the usual suspects, your Georgias, your Alabamas, your LSUs. You have Tennessee in that mix as well. Florida wants to get back in that mix. You look at Texas A&M. So it's going to be very tough for Pete Golding and company to keep up. But if he's a guy who wants to be at Ole Miss, there's potential for success for him there. Ole Miss is a school, typically, they get the home guys to go there and play. They have their NIL collective. They have the resources there. Of course, the resources at LSU are a little bit more vast. But again, you have resources at Ole Miss if you want to go out there and compete, and I think they will. Make no mistake about it. Some folks already feel that Ole Miss's biggest rival is LSU. No disrespect to Mississippi State. The Mississippi State Egg Bowl battle is still huge. But I think what we're about to see with LSU and Ole Miss is going to be right up there with LSU and Alabama as far as their rivalry goes. Because you remember that rivalry went to another level when Nick Saban decided to return to the SEC and take over at Alabama, and it has not been the same for either school since then. But I feel that this Ole Miss LSU rivalry just became must-see TV for the better part of the next decade. I'll tell you something else. You've got Pete Golding because Ole Miss was really in a bind, and they had to go out there and get themselves a head coach who's committed to the program. I'm going to throw a name out there. Some people might agree with this, some people might not. It's all good. Maybe Ole Miss puts a feeler out there for Dan Mullen at UNLV. Dan Mullen did have some success at Florida before his last year, but you look at Dan Mullen's time at Mississippi State, and he had some success there. He knows how to recruit the state. He knows how to win in the SEC. And I think deep down inside, I know that Dan Mullen took the UNLV job and he's having success there in the Mountain West. I think part of Dan Mullen wants to be back in the SEC. Ole Miss might have an opportunity to do something strange right here and bring him back to the Southeastern Conference. I'm just throwing the name out there. Okay. But nonetheless, going forward after what we just saw with this Lane Kiffin fiasco, I guarantee you that there's a lot athletic directors and school presidents going forward around college football who are going to change the language in these contracts of some of these head coaches going forward. Basically, they're going to try to find ways um, that you know what you got to stay there for the entire season. Not trying to have a coach leave to take another job in the same conference. You name it. There's going to be verbiage going around, but the bottom line is it's just bad right now. I know Rick Pitino, the current head coach of St. John's, threw out an example. Hey, what if, I'm coaching at St. John's, we get a number one seed in the NCAA tournament. Before the tournament, I decide to bolt and take another job. This is basically the equivalent of what we're seeing. And I know some people are saying, well, don't blame Lane Kiffin, blame college football. Absolutely. Okay. But and again, Lane Kiffin is not blameless in this. But I've said it before, the NCAA needs structure, and they don't have it. You look at the way that schools are jumping around from conference to conference, the lack of clarity and the lack of transparency in the transfer portal and the NILs, another big thing right there. And then the way that coaches are jumping ship around college football, another big thing right there. And I'll tell you like this, I think I should have gone out there and I should have become a head coach in college football. Why? Because coaching aside, those payouts and those buyouts that some of these schools are throwing out right there, they're better than a pension fund. I'll tell you like that right now. If this doesn't work out for Lane Kiffin at at LSU, I guarantee you that's some generational wealth, if you will, that is coming the way of the Kiffin family. And I'll tell you like this: with what Lane Kiffin just did to Ole Miss, who's to say that Lane Kiffin won't do it to LSU? And that's the thing, it's buyer beware. It's kind of like, you know what? If you have a girl out there who left her guy to be with you, it's not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee that she's going to stay with you, because the next hot thing that comes along, guess what? She's out of town on the first thing smoking. And I guarantee you, for all of their resources, for all of their money, if somebody else comes a calling in 4 or 5 years, or if Lane Kiffin cannot deal with the expectations or the pressure to win and win right away at LSU, I guarantee you he'll be out of town on the first thing smoking, because yes, LSU has money. Yes, LSU has resources, but there's a lot of other big schools around college football that have the same, and in some cases, better. Okay, so if somebody comes flirting with Lane Kiffin, do not be surprised if he leaves town. He's shown that throughout his years. He did it to Tennessee, he just did it to Ole Miss, and he could eventually do it to LSU someday. But nonetheless, this is a fiasco's fiasco. And the bottom line is it was all created by Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin wanted the attention. Lane Kiffin wanted the smoke. And then once he got the smoke, he didn't want to deal with it. He tried to deflect after the game on Friday and single out a reporter on the field. But deep down, I think Lane Kiffin, even then, he knew what he wanted to do. Okay. And it's a typical Lane Kiffin move. He's probably going to have some success at LSU. Left a lot of heartbroken people behind in Oxford, and for the most part, the state of Mississippi as a whole. But nonetheless, that is the landscape of college football. Ole Miss has to pick up the pieces and move on, while LSU has the ball coach that they wanted. But folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. And as always, if you like what you heard and saw on this podcast, you know what to do. Just hit that like button as well as subscribing to this channel. And like I always say, it's greatly appreciated. Also, if you are on the X, formerly known as Twitter, you can check me out anytime at 300 pounds of sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. And the same goes for Instagram, where you can check me out at 300 pounds of sports knowledge. Also, definitely make sure to check out this channel throughout the week. I've got a lot to talk about leading up to conference championship weekend, as well as the college football playoff outlook. Also, if you are on Facebook, definitely check out the Sports Depot 365. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the better sports groups going on social media. But until next time, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying thanks once again for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.